There is a plant growing in abandoned lots across this continent that once fed entire communities. Not occasionally, not as emergency food, as a dependable source of survival. Indigenous communities considered it so essential they wouldn't travel without it. Today, most municipalities classify that same plant as a noxious weed and spend millions trying to eradicate it. That contradiction isn't accidental. It's the key to this story. This is not nostalgia, it's about power. Somewhere between the last generation that knew this plant by name and the one that forgot it, something shifted. Not through violence, not through laws, through reclassification. The plant didn't change. What changed was what the system decided it was allowed to be. You walk past this plant every day. You've seen it cracking through sidewalks, growing behind your apartment building, thriving in the empty lot on your commute. It's probably within 50 feet of you right now. But no one ever told you what it was for. That omission wasn't random, not in the sense of a conspiracy, but in the way systems quietly remove knowledge that no longer serves them. Once something is no longer named as food, it stops being seen as food at all. For 10,000 years, across radically different climates and cultures, certain plants kept people alive, not as supplements, not as occasional medicine, as infrastructure, as essential as knowing where water was or how to make fire. The plant we're discussing was one of these anchors. Plains tribes carried its seeds during every migration, knowing that wherever they stopped, it could grow. Desert communities planted it at seasonal camps, so food would be waiting when they returned. Coastal peoples developed ways to process it, so it could be stored through entire winters. It had dozens of names because it had dozens of uses. Every region that encountered it formed its own relationship with it. Some ate the leaves fresh, others dried them for winter. Some ground the seeds into flour, others cooked them like grain. The plant adapted, and people adapted with it. Here's what matters most. This wasn't specialist knowledge. It wasn't hidden. It wasn't controlled by elites. Your great-grandmother probably knew this plant by name. Your great-great-grandmother certainly did. Children learn to identify it the same way they learn to avoid poisonous berries. Because in a world where one failed harvest could mean starvation, knowing which plants around you were edible wasn't folklore. It was literacy for survival. So how did something this essential get reclassified into something people were taught to ignore? Watch what happens when you trace the written record. The language tells the story. In the 1800s, agricultural surveys mention this plant frequently. Farmers knew it provided dependable, high-quality nutrition. Botanists documented it carefully. It appeared in farming guides. Then the tone changes. In the early 1900s, it's described as persistent, difficult to control, spreads aggressively. Those words sound neutral until you notice they're only used for things people are trying to eliminate. By the 1950s, the reclassification is complete. The plant is no longer discussed as food, no longer listed as medicine. It now appears in one context only, as a weed. And that word matters. Weed isn't a biological category. There's no scientific definition separating weeds from non-weeds. It's a political designation. A weed is simply a plant growing where someone with authority has decided it shouldn't exist. The plant didn't change. Its nutrition didn't diminish. Its usefulness didn't disappear. The system around it did. So what kind of system needs to eliminate free food? Industrial agriculture required monocultures, vast fields of single crops planted in identical rows, managed with standardized equipment and chemicals. Diversity became inefficiency. Anything that didn't fit the model became a problem. This plant was a problem. It grows without permission. It thrives in disturbed soil. It doesn't require planting, irrigation, or fertilizer. It can't be patented, and you can't sell it back to people year after year. The exact traits that made it valuable for survival made it incompatible with an economy built on selling inputs. This wasn't conspiracy. No one sat in a room deciding what people should forget. It was structural. Modern food systems rely on centralized production and distributed consumption. You don't grow food, you buy it. You don't need to understand how it's produced, only how to pay for it. That model preserves certain kinds of knowledge: how to engineer crops at scale, how to optimize logistics, how to extend shelf life, and it quietly discards others: how to identify edible plants growing wild, how to prepare food without infrastructure, how to survive without a supply chain. Not because that knowledge is dangerous, but because it isn't profitable. Within 2 generations, common knowledge became obscure. Within 4, it nearly vanished. Not because the plant disappeared, but because no one was teaching the next generation how to see it. Which raises an uncomfortable question. What if that knowledge still matters? This is not ancient history. Right now, this exact plant is growing within 100 feet of where you're sitting, in sidewalk cracks, along fence lines, behind gas stations, in strips of neglected dirt no one pays attention to. It thrives precisely where human systems break down, and it still has the same properties it had 1,000 years ago: the same nutritional density, the same protein content, the same ability to sustain human life. The knowledge didn't disappear because it stopped being true. It disappeared because we built systems that made it seem unnecessary. Why learn to identify food when stores are always stocked? Why recognize edible plants when convenience is cheap? But systems don't stay stable forever. Supply chains fracture, prices spike, shelves empty, and suddenly, what once seemed irrelevant becomes practical again. History stops being trivia, it becomes instruction. So what is resilience, actually? Resilience isn't stockpiling things that eventually run out. Real resilience is knowledge. It's the ability to recognize resources already around you. Resources that require no infrastructure, no permission, no money. The people who knew this plant didn't depend on grocery stores to survive hard times. They possessed a kind of wealth that couldn't be confiscated because it existed in their minds and in the landscape at the same time. That wealth still exists. You just weren't taught to see it. Look around your neighborhood differently for a moment. That so-called weed in the alley, that persistent green thing the city keeps spraying with herbicides. Your ancestors ate that, fed their children with it, survived winters because of it. It's not gone, you just forgot its name. And once you know the name, you'll realize it's everywhere. The plant we've been discussing is lambsquarters, Chenopodium album. The Latin name doesn't matter. What matters is that it's still here. It grows in all 50 states and most countries worldwide. It's more nutritious than cultivated spinach, higher in protein, calcium, iron, and vitamins A and C. The leaves can be eaten raw or cooked. The seeds can be ground into flour. Indigenous communities across continents relied on it as a staple food. Your grandmother might have known this plant. Your great-grandmother almost certainly did. Somewhere in your family line, someone recognized this as food. It never left. It was simply renamed. And once you know what to look for, you'll start seeing it everywhere, growing quietly in the places no one thought mattered, including right outside your door.